My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of Earth's earliest patriarchs and prophets, collected in this book, Survivors of the Dark Rebellion, God's Heroes from Adam to David. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words Parental Guidance Recommended. Chapter 7, Melinda. Exciting things were afoot in Egypt. Pharaoh's daughter had rescued a Hebrew baby from the death decree her father had ordered against all the baby boys, and then she had raised him in the palace as her own son. All of us watchers were pretty certain that he was the promised one who would lead the Israelites out of Egypt and away from their slavery. So it was with mixed feelings that I received my present assignment. My charge is out in the Sinai desert. The daughter of Jethro, a shepherd priest of Midian, who worships the one God. He is also a descendant of Abraham's son by his second wife, Keturah. As a worshipper of the Almighty, Jethro received the same blessings and protection, and so it came to be that heaven assigned me to his daughter, Melinda. Although blessed with 7 beautiful daughters, Jethro had no sons. Life as a desert sheep herder was difficult without sons, and so his daughters had to fill that role until such a time as they were old enough to marry, so that their father would have sons-in-law. Of course, this posed problems of its own, since by custom they would join the families of their husbands. Jethro tried not to think about that, and meanwhile I concentrated on recording the choices of one of the younger daughters. Zipporah, Melinda's older sister, was in charge of the flocks. 4 of the other sisters went along to help her each day. Melinda and one younger sister stayed home and took care of the cooking and other home duties, but in the afternoons, when Zipporah and the other girls brought the sheep back, they would join them at the well to help draw water for them. Watering the sheep was a back-breaking job, and it always amazed Melinda how much the woolly animals could drink. As if drawing water from the deep well was not trial enough, they also had to deal with Eliphaz and his friends. Eliphaz cared for a flock of sheep that grazed close by. Every day when the girls would bring their sheep to the well before they took them home to their enclosure for the night, Eliphaz would bully the girls. Sometimes he would shove them out of the way while he watered his flock first, making them wait even though they were there first. Other times he would force them to draw water for his sheep as well. Melinda cringed inside every time she saw him coming. Yet she could do little about it. Her father said that they couldn't afford to have hostile relations with the Amalekite family of whom Eliphaz was a part. For now, they would just have to share the water and do their best to avoid the man. Today, when Melinda and her younger sister approached the well, they noticed someone already there. They paused and stared at the man sleeping in the scant shade of a small bush.
"He looks like an Egyptian,"
Melinda whispered. Her little sister, Serena, nodded.
"But he's all alone, and nobody travels through the desert all alone."
Melinda thought about that fact. It was far too dangerous because of bandits and other threats. Anyone making a journey usually joined a group of merchants for safety in numbers. The girls crept around to the other side of the well to get a better look at the stranger.
"Well, whoever he is, he's very handsome,"
Melinda said quietly. Just then they heard the sound of sheep. Moments later, Zipporah, with her flock of sisters and sheep, rounded the bend in the wadi and approached the well. Still, the Egyptian appeared to sleep. Ignoring him completely, Zipporah headed for the well.
"Look at this, girls," she said. "We've made it to the well before Eliphaz. Perhaps if we work fast, we can get our sheep watered before he gets here."
The girls laughed and swarmed around the well, tugging the ropes that held the heavy goatskin bucket of water as they raised it and dumped it into the trough for their animals to drink.
"Maybe you should just come early a few minutes every day," Melinda suggested. "It doesn't give the sheep as long to graze, but it sure would be worth it."
"Why have you started without me?"
a male voice suddenly demanded. Zipporah's shoulders sagged as she looked up.
"Eliphaz, what a surprise."
"On the contrary," he replied, "it seems that it is you that has prepared a lovely surprise for me, already filling the trough for my animals to drink."
"The surprise was not for you," she countered. "The water is for our animals."
"Oh, I don't think so,"
he said, continuing his feigned politeness. He nodded at the boys with him. With their staffs, they pushed Zipporah's sheep away and guided their own to the troughs.
"Eliphaz, there's not fear," Zipporah protested. "You know how much work it is for us to pull up all that water. We did that for our sheep."
He smirked.
I do know how much work it is. That's why I'm so grateful. Now if you'll step out of the way.
No, she shouted. He shoved Zipporah to the side. The Egyptian, who had roused from his sleep, now strode to the well. Lifting Zipporah back to her feet, he smiled at the girls, and then turned to Eliphaz.
I couldn't help overhearing, he said.
I smiled to myself, knowing who had been sleeping beneath the shrub, for I recognized his guardian. Not only did his charge best the other shepherds in a 3-to-1 fight, but he made them draw water for the girls' flocks. I chuckled. His temper may be too short to lead the children of Jacob out of their slavery at this point in time, but it certainly came in handy for defending my charge, who now stood with her mouth hanging open. For that matter, so did all her sisters. When their flocks had finished drinking, they thanked him and hurried away, leaving their benefactor standing by the well with the 3 shepherds, who now had to draw water for their own flocks.
"Oh, you left him where? At the well with those Amalekites alone?"
Jethro, their father, shouted.
"What were you thinking? Where's your sense of hospitality? Your mother would be ashamed. Go back and get him at once."
The girls scrambled from the tent.
"Melinda, you and Serena make sure we have food prepared. The rest of us will go back and get him." "We want to go too,"
Melinda complained, but Zipporah was already hurrying down the path. The girls sighed, and grabbing young Serena by the hand, headed over toward the cooking fire.
"We should probably bake more bread too,"
she said to her sister, eyeing the small stack of flatbread she and her sister had made that afternoon.
"We don't want to run out. I'd hate for that Egyptian man to consider us poor hosts."
Serena smiled.
"I'll help you. Let's do it right away. Maybe we can get some of these dried figs out of the cave too. This is a special occasion."
From their vantage point, they could see Zipporah talking to the Egyptian, and then watched as the 2 of them headed back toward Father's tent.
"I wonder who he is," Melinda whispered. "Did you see his hands? They don't look like he's done a day's work in his life." "But he's so strong," her sister protested. "Did you see those muscles?" "Of course," the older girl said haughtily. "He had to have muscles to defeat all 3 shepherds at once."
Both girls giggled.
"Wasn't that great? And he made them draw all the water for us. It was only fair after all the times they've made us water their flocks."
The girls soon finished their meal preparation and headed to their father's tent. They crouched behind it where they could hear what was being said.
"So, how did you come to be crossing the desert alone?" they heard their father ask.
"It's a long story," the Egyptian replied, not offering to tell it.
"Had some trouble in Egypt?"
It was half a question, half an answer from Jethro. Melinda frowned, wishing she could see their faces as they talked.
"You're welcome to stay with us for as long as you wish,"
their father offered. "I thank you for your hospitality," the Egyptian answered.
"You know," Jethro's voice came again, "I was blessed with beautiful daughters, but I have no sons. It would be good to have another man in the family. If you choose to stay and help the girls, as you did today, I would be more than grateful."
Melinda yelped as she suddenly felt herself lifted off her feet by a hand on the back of her robe.
"What do you think you're doing?" Zipporah scolded. "You know that eavesdropping is rude. Give Father his privacy to talk to the Egyptian. Bring the food, for he'll be staying for dinner."
The 2 younger girls scampered back to the cooking fire and then looked over their shoulder to see Zipporah listening from the vantage point they had had just moments before.
"Do you think he'll stay?" Serena asked. "I don't know. I hope so."
I looked at the Egyptian's guardian. He shrugged.
"Where else would he go?"
he asked me. I didn't know either, but was glad he was staying in the tents of Jethro, since I knew the Almighty had important plans for this one, and I was glad he was near enough that I could be in on the action. It had been several months since the handsome Egyptian had joined their family clan. He was quiet and didn't talk about himself much, but Melinda had learned his name was Moses, a good Egyptian name. It was a little confusing, though, to watch him when Father offered the evening sacrifices to the one God. Moses seemed to be worshipping too, and he was constantly asking questions. Father would sit for hours at the campfire in the evenings, telling him the stories Melinda and her sisters had grown up on, stories of Adam and Eve, of Noah and his family, and of Abraham, their ancestor. He also inquired about the other side of the family, about the sons of Isaac and of Jacob. Jethro told him all of the stories he knew and answered every question as honestly as possible. One evening, as Melinda was bringing the food to the men at the campfire, she heard Jethro say,
"So, Moses, how long are you going to be content just to be a stranger among us? Why don't you marry my oldest daughter and be the heir of my flocks and of the clan?"
Melinda dropped her breadbasket with a clatter, but neither Moses nor Jethro seemed to hear. Well, Moses stammered, something he did at times. "You don't know who I am."
"It's true,"
Melinda thought. They didn't know who he was. At least she didn't. Sometimes he seemed so intelligent. Moses knew how to deal with people, especially those Amalekite shepherds who used to bother them. He knew how to negotiate for the best deals with the traders who came through with grain and food and got the best prices for the clan's wool. Yet other times, he seemed discouraged. A beaten man who had lost a great battle, though she couldn't imagine anything ever defeating him. The Egyptian was a puzzling man.
"We know who you are, Moses,"
Jethro said softly. As he glanced up sharply, Moses' eyes met the priest's. Melinda crept closer to the fire, forgetting the food lying in the dust.
"You think we get no news from Egypt out here? Yet every caravan that comes through the desert this direction stops by here to trade or just to eat. We hear many things."
"What have you heard?"
"We heard of one who was in the palace and assumed to be the son of Pharaoh's daughter, yet he refused to worship the gods of Egypt and chose to identify with the God of the Hebrews."
Moses flinched as if Jethro had struck him.
"We heard of a fight in which he defended a Hebrew slave against a slave master and killed the overseer. We heard that he fled from Egypt and totally disappeared, and no one knows where he is, about the same time as you showed up at our well."
Moses lowered his eyes. "So, are you going to return me to Egypt?"
"Don't be silly," said Jethro. "I want you for a son. If you're good enough for the Pharaoh, you're more than good enough for the likes of me."
Both men laughed nervously. I do worship the one God," Moses explained, "but I'm a failure and a disappointment. I was to lead the one God's people out of their slavery, and yet my short temper ruined God's plan. I had to escape here to the desert, where I will probably spend the rest of my life in hiding." He shrugged. "I am a failure." Jethro listened quietly.
"The one God is very wise," he said. "Often his plans are more complicated than what we understand at the time."
His reply did not comfort Moses.
"Meanwhile," Jethro continued, slapping him on the shoulder, "you have a life to live, my son. Come, be my son. I'll give you Zipporah, my oldest daughter. Marry her. Be my heir."
Moses clasped the man's hand in his. "I will, and I will treat your daughter well." Jethro nodded.
"It's settled then. I thought I was going to have to travel elsewhere to find some God-fearing relatives for my daughters to marry. I could hardly let them marry those shepherds who pester them all the time. Well," he chuckled, "who used to pester them before you came?"
Moses smiled. "They won't be bothering them any time soon," he smiled, and the two men laughed. Melinda slipped backward into the darkness.
"I've got to tell Zipporah," she thought.
Would Zipporah be happy? Most likely, for all of them had admired the stranger from Egypt, and yet, of all of them, Zipporah was the most headstrong. Melinda turned and ran toward the girl's tent. She could hardly wait to share the news. Melinda scampered along next to Moses. It was hard to match his long, powerful strides through the wadi as he led the sheep away from the encampment toward a grazing area.
"It's not going to be much longer now," she observed to Moses, who nodded.
Zipporah's baby was due any day, and she was too big and too uncomfortable to hike out with her husband and the sheep. She stayed in the shelter of the family tent.
"Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?"
Melinda asked. Moses glanced at the girl. "I'm hoping for a healthy child," he said, "who looks like his mother."
"His mother? So you want a boy?"
He laughed. "I suppose every man wants a boy, but I would love a daughter too. Whatever the Lord sends me, I will accept."
"Yeah, that's what Father always said, but I think he wished he had a boy."
"Well, he has me." Melinda laughed. When Moses wasn't busy singing depressing songs to himself out in the wilderness, he could have a real arrogant streak at times.
"Yes, what more could Father desire than an Egyptian prince for a son-in-law?"
Moses winced. "It's best we never speak of that. Besides, no Egyptian prince would ever tend sheep." The girl was silent for a few moments, then threw back her shoulders.
"Well, I'm proud to care for the sheep of the clan of Jethro. There are a lot of worse things."
Moses nodded. "Yes, there are, and we should be grateful to the one God for giving us the life he does." The girl enjoyed tending the flocks with Moses, even though he was easily distracted, and spent much of his days scribbling on papyrus instead of watching the sheep. He was so interesting to talk to. She always marveled at how someone could be so intelligent about so many things and yet so ignorant about the ways of sheep. However, in the years since he had joined the clan and married her sister, Zipporah, he had learned a lot.
"What are you scribbling about this week?"
Moses looked surprised.
"Oh, don't act so surprised. We all know what you do when you're out watching the sheep."
I, Moses started to stammer. I'm just writing the stories that your father tells me. My mother told me stories of Isaac and Jacob, the ones she knew, but your father's related to me so many more that are part of my family history too, and I just don't want to forget them."
"Your family history?" Melinda demanded. "We're not related to any Egyptians."
"Someday it will all make sense to you, maybe," Moses continued. "Right now, I don't want to talk about it, but I'll tell you about the story I'm writing down. It's the one your father told us last week, the one about the wealthy man from the land of Uz."
"Oh, Job."
Yes, it was a fascinating story, and even though he went through such difficult times during the middle of his life, our one God took good care of him and restored everything and more to him later and rewarded him for his endurance.
He's like that," the girl said, "and he's going to do that for you too."
Moses stared at her.
"He will," she insisted. "He's like that to those who love him and are faithful to him. You'll see."
"I guess it's hard to see from this point in life," he said. "Perhaps I made too many mistakes, and he's put me out here in the desert with these sheep where I can't mess up his plans any worse than I already have." Melinda laughed.
"The one God is very kind and gracious. He is patient and forgiving and gives us second chances and third chances and prepares us other plans when we make mistakes. The God of Abraham is just and fair. While he does punish people who are bad, to those who are sorry he offers forgiveness. Maybe you should have Father sacrifice a lamb for you. You know, if you offer a sin offering, he's promised to take away any wrong things you've ever done. It's as if you never did them, and the mistakes that you made are transferred onto the lamb, and when it dies, your sins are paid for."
Moses watched her intently. I will speak to Jethro about this," he said finally.
"Good. Then maybe you'll quit singing such depressing songs. I think the one God prefers us to sing happy praises to him, instead of this miserable stuff you sing about your sins always being before your face."
Her brother-in-law reddened. "You have been listening."
"Uh-huh. I'm sorry for anyone who feels like that all the time, but I don't believe that our God has sent you out in the desert here to punish you for whatever it is you did. He has a plan, and you just need to be patient. Hopefully, though, it won't be one that takes you away from us. Zipporah would be very upset."
Moses laughed. "She is my wife. If the plan took me away from here, she would go with me." Melinda thought a moment.
Probably so. I suppose all of us will have to leave Father when we marry."
"Yes, that's usually the way it works, but when you have a husband, at least no one will make you go away from him. You can count on being with him the rest of your life."
"Well, then I hope he's a nice one, and not like these pesky shepherds."
He roared with laughter. "And now, Melinda, those pesky shepherds haven't bothered you for several years."
"That's true, but I remember what they did before you came."
"I recall them very politely drawing all the water you needed for your sheep that day." The girl shrieked with laughter.
"Yes, they did. It made them so angry that they don't even come to this well to water their sheep anymore, which is fine by me. I'm glad you're here with us, Moses."
Although he smiled, he couldn't bring himself to say that he also was glad to be there. Melinda decided to change the subject.
"You know, I'm pretty well grown up now," she said. "I'm 14 now. I've been a marriageable age for years."
"Yes," he said, "you seemed like such a little girl when I joined your family."
"I'm grown up,"
Melinda insisted. "And a fine woman you've become."
"Has Father talked to you about a husband for me?"
"Yes, Jethro has discussed making a trip back east to find some of his relatives who might still worship the one God."
"He's always said he'd rather see us unmarried than coupled with someone who didn't worship our God," she said. "But most of the people who worship our God are in Egypt."
"As slaves, that would hardly be the place to look for a fitting husband for you."
"Well, Father might not have to look that far for a husband for me."
"Oh, you've given this some thought?" Now it was her turn to blush and stammer.
"Well, yes. You know the traders who come through here?"
"Many pass through. Which ones?"
"Well, the one that has the young man who's traveling with his uncle. Apparently his parents have died. They were metal workers."
Yes, but I don't believe his relatives worship the one God."
"That's true, but Canaan does."
"Kenan," Moses echoed. You know this young man's name?"
"Well, I just picked it up in passing,"
the girl stammered. "Just in passing, huh?" he teased. "How is it that he's a worshipper of the one God when his uncle wears amulets to several other deities?"
"His parents were," she said.
It is difficult for a young man to stay loyal to the God of his parents when all those he lives with worship other gods, Moses agreed. Perhaps I can speak to Jethro about this, and we can invite him to stay in our camp until his uncle comes through on his next journey. We could use some better metal implements, knives and other things. That will give your father and I a chance to get to know him.
Oh, thank you.
Melinda beamed, then she rushed off to chase a wayward sheep.
This broadcast has come from the book Survivors of the Dark Rebellion by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.